Every rising star in business wants to position their business and their brand for success. Now, even the average person in life wants to attain success. But have you ever asked yourself, what is the pathway to success? Well, today we will be examining a number of leadership skills, a number of processes, and that can be systemized to better position you for success. What we have learned is that three important things complement success. One is your leadership skills, two is your processes, the proven best practices, and systems. And the system has everything to do with your ability to systemize the best practices. So today we will do a high level overview of leadership processes and systems and really identify important concepts that you need to know when you want to position yourself for success. Now, this content in of itself is being drawn from a very unique program that is titled Pathway 5. And Pathway 5 is designed to really help you to understand the science, the theory, and the practice of wealth creation. The pathway to build wealth can come through starting and scaling a business, or it can come through passive investment. We are likely to examine some of these possibilities so as to ensure that you have the level of clarity to make a better business and life decision. To join me in this conversation today, I have one of my colleagues who is Clement Frank. In the event that you're wondering who is Clement Frank, well, he is an economist by profession and he is a leader by practice. And Frank is about to release his new book. And Frank, I want to welcome you. How are you? How was the weekend?
It was great. It was great.
I'm glad to hear
A
that.
lot of work. A
All
lot of
right,
work.
I could imagine. Could imagine. You know, they say leaders never rest. They work all the time. Eh?
Just work.
But just before we get into this program, can you talk to us just a little bit about the book that you're about to release?
It's all about sound business leadership in today's dynamic world, and it sets the stage for sound leadership, knowing that sound leadership is paramount. Sound leadership sets a pace for the efficient operations of every system and every organization. It unites teams for success and allows the organization to function at a high level of efficiency. And this in turn will yield increased performance of the team, productivity, cash flow, and profitability. Therefore, the organization will become a powerhouse in a business and marketing model. We find that unity strengthens the relationships and camaraderie among team members, and there must be open communication and ideas, which foster an organic operation. And this allows team members to be creative and innovative. So the book speaks to all of this. It speaks to some leadership, that meaning significantly investing in the best training and development for the team, and creates avenues for deploying each team member into strategic roles within the organization. So when we talk about sound leadership, we're talking about not just leading, but leading from all aspects, leading from the center, a 360-degree leading internationally, leading in your home, leading as a business person, leading as an entrepreneur, leading as an economist. So the book speaks to that and so much more.
Sounds pretty exciting there, my friend. Can't wait to get my hands on that book.
That's going to
All right,
happen.
thanks for that share. Great. Now, I want to bring attention to this topic. Today, we're looking at leadership process and processes and systems and the important concepts that you should know. Now, what I will do, I just want to explain a lot of what I'm going to be saying going in today is going to be coming from this thesis. We have recently developed this thesis that we call Pathway 5. And Pathway 5 is really designed to help you to understand what we call the science, theory, and practice of wealth creation. Now, any effort to grow and scale your business and any effort to position yourself to attain greatness, and three important things should always come to mind. One is leadership. So I want us to expand our conversation by looking at definitions of leadership. The second concept that is important for you to understand is what are processes. So we'll spend some time looking at some definitions of processes. And last but not least is what are systems. And we'll spend some time looking at some systems before we go into examples of how leadership processes and systems can really set the stage to drive the vision of your business forward. Now, what is leadership? And of course, we will look at leadership from different standpoints. I will look at leadership from proactive leadership. Now, if you want to be successful in business and in life, important to position yourself to be a proactive leader. Now, what makes a leader a proactive leader? Well, there are three essential characteristics that makes the proactive leader proactive. One, proactive leaders that think ahead. What are those things that you're thinking ahead about? Are you thinking about the human resource needs to move the vision forward? Are you thinking about the technical resource needs to move the vision forward? And are you thinking about the capital resource needs to move the vision forward? Now, a proactive leader, you owe it to yourself to think about these issues, because in the absence of thinking about these issues, you're forced into a place where you're reacting. And that's the last place that you want to be when you're positioning your vision for greatness. So the first step is to ensure that you're thinking ahead. Now, as you think ahead of human, technical, and capital resources, what we see happens very often, you see the challenges to access. Perhaps you're seeing you're not able to access the right human resources or the right technical resources, depending on where you are in the world. Or you may have access to capital, but not diversified financial instruments. You may have access to debt, and debt may come at high APR. So, because you might have some knowledge about credit or hard money lending or equity capital, you know that they're a better option, but you don't have access to it, and you're stuck in the problem zone. Proactive leaders, they train the mind to come to that second stage, and that is how to take informed action to achieve desired results. It's about breaking through the problem zone. All right. You don't want to be stuck in the problem zone. So the proactive leadership really helps you to understand some of the best practices to break through that problem zone. Now, essential to breaking through problem zone brings us to the third element of leadership, which we look at in terms of informed action. Now, the ability to take informed action simply explains that in the case that you don't want debt financing and perhaps you need equity financing to move the vision forward, because you are now at that stage where you're able to take informed action, means that you know exactly what are the practical steps to take to acquire equity financing. Now, this is something that you may be able to do locally, regionally, or internationally. And you know that you're able to do this because at this stage of taking informed action, several things happen. It means that you are a subject matter expert and you know how to deploy yourself in the manner to put together an equity group of investors and to be able to leverage this to your advantage. You know it because you might have studied it, you might have worked in the field, you might have gained some experience, and you work it to your advantage. Now, it is sad to say that many persons across the world, they are not necessarily in this position of strength to leverage their knowledge and experience and expertise to position the business and the brand to attain equity financing. And very often what happens when you don't have the expertise, it goes back to the second phase where you are not able to see beyond the problem, so you become stuck in the problem zone. So there are options that are available to you if you don't have the skill set. There is what we call mentorship. Can you be mentored by a financial specialist that's going to help you to understand the various type of financial instruments that you can now leverage to your advantage? Mentorship can get you through that. Do you have a coach that can provide you with the support that you need to be able to get a clear mental picture as to how you can apply yourself at this? Can you have a sponsor? Sponsor that may have all the experience and perhaps maybe an equity investor themselves that can come alongside you to help you to achieve this. And next, you may have a supportive community. So these are all options that you have that you can now deploy to access the type of capital that you believe is best for you. Perhaps you might even be able to look at creative financing. And because of the nature of creative financing, guess what? You don't have APR to pay them because it is creative financing. So this is just an example of showing you how leadership plays a very important role in how you position yourself to achieve greatness. Now, I'll turn to Frank to talk a little bit about leadership. And then when I come back, I'll talk about processes, because the processes now are the strategies, the tools that you're going to deploy. So I'm going to go deep into this to ensure that the listening audience, you have a clear mental picture of what we are talking about. So these nugget-sized information, you can take them and perhaps deploy them within your organization. Now, of course, if you need more information, we'll be so happy to work with you. Frank, all to you. Love to hear your thoughts on leadership and the important role it plays in positioning people for success. All to you,
And
Frank.
thank you very much, Gary. And the thing about it is,
Welcome, my friend.
you talk about process, but there is a leadership process, because the really leadership role often changes significantly in high performance organization. And this is true for the executives, and supervisors alike. But all too often, leaders consider changes to high performance as a technique or program which others must implement, but fail to realize the extent to which they must be personally involved and change themselves. And since high performance is a way of thinking about and managing the business, the transformation process begins by helping senior leadership define not only what they should be doing in the organization, but how they should go about doing
Frank,
it.
not
You
cutting you.
hearing
Can you pull your mic a little closer to your mouth? Pull your mic a little closer to your mouth. Yes,
hearing me better? All
much
right.
better.
What I was saying is that since high performance is a way of thinking about and managing the business, the
Mhm.
transformation process begins by helping senior leadership define not only what they should be doing in the organization, but how they should go about doing it. And that leadership process includes about 5 essential steps. The step one is leadership orientation and commitment. A commitment is a word in leadership that makes you understand how the importance that leadership, and once you're into committed leadership, you see, leadership or orientation commitment is normally a 1 to 2 day orientation session in which key leaders from the organization learn about high performance. In this session, participants go through an organization simulation to experience the difference between traditional and high performance work systems. Now, as they learn and discuss principles of high performance, they will learn about the transformation process. They will explore the level of trust within the organization and identify what are the change needs driving the organization. And then the second step is the assessment of the business and organization. Now, the purpose of this step is to complement a comprehensive assessment of the organization. We're creating a common understanding of the current state of the business. And key leadership with a cross section of people from the organization analyzes a business case study to learn how to use the transformation model as a framework for organization analysis. Then they apply the transformation model to their own organization. So they systematically analyze 7 key elements and the current results in the business environment, the current strategy, current code processes, current structure, and coordination and development systems. Following their analysis, they summarize key issues to address and identify organization strengths, the organization weaknesses, and alignment issues. Once they're armed with the comprehensive assessment data, they can develop a list of change initiatives for improving the organization and moving toward high performance. The assessment process can be modularized into half these sessions spread over 9 to 10 period, or it can be accomplished more quickly in a single 3-day session. And this step often surfaces significant problems with the organization in that it creates a sense of direction and momentum for needed changes. And every participant will come away from this dynamic session with a greater sense of responsibility, knowing how and enthusiasm for making the business success. The third one is development of strategy and vision. Now, in this step, the key leaders develop and or adjust the business strategy and direction of the organization. And during this process, what they do is that they review their strategy and vision based on current business realities, refocusing and redefining the strategy to fit marketplace and competitive demands. Specifically, they will accomplish the following during the process of understanding the demands of the current business environment, forecast the future business situation, clarify a mission that motivates and inspires. They identify the principles by which people will conduct themselves. They define the future customers and how they will deliver value to them. They identify core competencies needed to succeed in the long run. They create a long-term business focus and identify anchors that distinguish them from competitors. They set short-term performance goals and then identify performance initiatives and establish a master plan to implement the strategy. Now, the strategy development process often requires several in-depth exploration and discussion sessions, which may be accomplished over a period of weeks or months, depending on the size, depending on motivation and complexity of the organization. Clearly, the process must be tailored to the individual needs of each organization. I'm confident that the senior leadership will emerge from the strategy development sessions being very clear about their strategy and united in their commitment to implement it throughout the organization. And there are other steps, but I don't want to take up much more time, so I'll hand you back over to Master Gary.
All right, my friend. Yeah, you made mention of a number of important points
I
that I'm really trusting that the listeners are taking key notes of what is being said. However, there's one area I do believe the digestion period of information, to the extent where it becomes a effective application, varies from persons to person, and that's something that can talk about later on. However, getting back to the subject, to be successful in business and in life, there's a concept that we call preparation. And in the pathway 5, we talk about the science, theory, and practice of preparation. All of what Frank would have just spoken about represents part of the preparation process. So if you want to deploy yourself after success, it's important to ask yourself, how can I be prepared for this? It doesn't make sense to attempt to bake a cake and you perhaps have never baked a cake and you don't understand the process of building that cake. So the smart way to go about preparing yourself to bake the cake is to get as much information as possible to move that cake baking process forward. Now, in this context, the cake that you're baking is positioning your business for success. And what we've identified at the beginning of this program, there are three important ingredients that you need to position that business for success. One is leadership. I spoke a lot on leadership. Frank spoke to some area of leadership, but he expanded the conversation beyond leadership. But you need to understand these ingredients. You need to understand processes. What is processes? And then you need to understand systems. What is systems? So let me talk a little bit about processes. Now, as we begin to look at processes, I want you to think about a couple of things. You are the public relation manager for your company, and the company is going to be launching a new product or a new service. Now, what you want to ask yourself is, what is the process to introduce that product to the market? You just don't wake up and say, product hit the market. There is a process. And it is by deploying a process consistently, it's by testing that process consistently, it becomes a strategy. So what you're able to do is take out the best practices from the strategy based on the results that you have gained, and you make it your process. You just don't want any old thing to be your process. Your process must be proven steps. Your process should be based on what we call the science of desired end results. And in Pathway 5, we talk about this. We talk about, is your process able to give you high reward? Is your process able to give you measurable results? Is your process able to give you predictable outcome with the highest degree of accuracy? Now, once you're able to deploy your processes to achieve all of the above, there is where you want it to go. Without this, you don't have a process. Now, let me talk just a little bit more about the process. There are people that do things in business, and these are just activities sometimes being executed in futility. The reason you want process is because it helps you to achieve some degree of consistency in how you're executing yourself to attain a desired end result. So they are public relation processes. They are marketing processes, and marketing processes are strategies. So see yourself in this case as a consultant. And as a consultant in marketing, clients are coming to you to get your best practices in how to deploy your process to help them to achieve the business objective. But think about it. In this case, that you don't have a standard operating procedure. So what happens in this case? It means that you are just executing with no clear standard operating procedure. Process, the best practices of processes, is very much your standard operating procedure. I'm going to give some more example of this as I go into systems. All right. So you need to understand this. The process is the best practices that you are using that is going to help you to attain the high reward, the measurable results, the predictable outcome with the highest degree of accuracy. And sometimes you need data. So if data is what is required to help you to strengthen your processes, it's something that you need to look at. All right, it's something that you need to look at. So HR tools and strategies is part of your process. But how would you feel that the HR department, they're doing one thing today and something else the next day? There's no consistency. If there's no consistency, you don't have strong processes. All right. So it's important that, to understand this, and let me also say this, in business and in life, they say success leave clues. And as you begin to look at clues, I think some people get scared of the clues because you expect one clue is going to be enough to position you for success. But the clues lies in your leadership skills. Think about people who have attained success who have not demonstrated leadership skills. Think about people who have success, but then they don't have any processes. So these are all the clues, but very often as you start to see the clues, you get scared because it seems like too much of work for you to do. But we have done this research and we have applied these systems. And I want to say, if you want to know more of what we are talking about, you should avail yourself to Pathway 5. Pathway 5 is going to be introducing a free introductory program that really helps you to understand how to deploy these tools, how to deploy these processes, and make them your systems to position yourself for success. Now, project management also falls into your process, falls into tools that you're going to use to achieve a specific objective. So I've given 4 examples in terms what your processes can be. And now very often to manage a business successfully is a broad ecosystem of business tools and strategies that you need to understand. All right, yes, HR is important to manage a business, and you need processes for HR so as to ensure that you have highly motivated workforce, so as to ensure that you have reduction in absenteeism, reduction in staff turnover, ensure that you have, performance optimization. You need HR to look into all of this. So that's one process that you need to understand. You need to have best practices established here so as to ensure that the team dynamics are feeling as though their interests are being looked at based on HR policies. But in as much that HR is important, market research is important, because if the business is conducting its activities without collecting critical information, analyzing critical information, leveraging critical information, and mitigating data in a business-friendly approach, what happens? You have weak processes, and you need to understand these processes in order to manage that business effectively. So when we talk of processes, it's one of the clues that you need to understand when you want to be successful. And it's very much so when you don't understand these processes, when you don't understand these clues that we're talking about today, you set your business up for failure. The clues are out there. But sometimes to the average person who is attempting to start and scale a business, when you see the amount of legwork that has to be done, it scares you. Now, as we go deeper into Pathway 5, there's so much more for us to talk to you about. Because in the event or in the case where you have big visions, but then you're scared of it because it looks like a lot of work to do, there's a concept that we call the 2080 rule. And this ties in with Peter Drucker, who is one of the greatest minds in management. And he talks about the difference between the executive and the executor. All right. The executive is the strategic thinker. All right. He is the person at the top of the organization. Now, the executor are your implementation unit. And when you create separation, you surround yourself with some of the brightest people that can help you move that vision forward, so you don't have to see the entire pie and become scared of it. And you build your processes along these lines. All right, so processes is very important, and process, to simplify this, is going to be the strategies that has been giving you proven results. So let me go back at this very explain this a little further. That I turn to Frank. What is processes? In the simplest of terms, processes represents the strategy that you're going to be using to attain high reward in HR, marketing, public relation, project management. Is the strategies that you're going to use to attain predictable results, measurable outcome with the highest degree of accuracy. The best practices becomes your processes. So I'm going to turn now to Frank. All to you. When I come back, I will go into systems, and then we'll give some examples of how you can deploy the leadership and the process, making it your systems to optimize your business. All to you, Frank.
Thanks, Gary. So the
Welcome, my friend.
fourth step in the process, the leadership process is chartering the change process. And during this step, the senior leadership determines the need for organization redesign in order to address the organizational weaknesses and alignment issues identified during their assessment. So they create a design charter which outlines the expected outcomes and the scope and parameters of the redesign process. They assign resources, they establish time frames and identify a design team to participate and guide in the process analysis. They redesign the organization as necessary. And they also determine the scope of the development process, identify leadership training, employee orientation, team development, technical skills development, interpersonal skills development, and other projected training and development needs. These plans are factored in with strategic initiatives and change opportunities identified during strategy development and assessment to create an overall change plan. The charge is then shared with employees to communicate the need for change and explain how the transformation process will work throughout the organization. And finally, there's an integrated management of business performance. That's step 5. Management of business performance, especially in today's complex and rapidly changing environment, can be extremely challenging. And so consequently, management behavior can be short-term and crisis-oriented. Managers and supervisors alike often react to demands which seem urgent but may only be symptoms of deeper causes related to flawed processes or systems. A further problem is that work may be segmented into functional areas, promoting poor communication, turf battles, a lack of problem ownership, their general efficiency. So in this step 5, the integrated management of business performance, leaders develop a common plan and establish management processes to proactively manage the short and long-term performance of the business. And one of the first tasks here is to help leaders begin to work as a team as they share responsibility for the overall management of the enterprise. And during the assessment, the organization identified key result areas and current performance in those areas. And during a strategy development, leaders identify ideal key result areas, how they will measure them, and what their goals are. Now that they're armed with this data, the leadership team outlines a process for how they will monitor, how they will track, and integrate performance throughout the organization on an ongoing basis, including common initiatives, clear expectations, and consistent performance metrics. This may then lead them into discussion or readjustment of recognition or reward or performance management systems as well. We also have what is considered systems leadership. And the emerging approach to driving what we call regenerative economics and sustainable transformation. Now, I'm always excited to start sharing thoughts and insight on systems leadership because this field has emerged to me as a unifying field of study and practice that encompasses all areas on systems transformation. I allude to this in my book, um, Thinking the Sustainable Transformation from a Living Systems and Regenerative Perspective. What I've discovered is the relevance and beauty of systems leadership. The Anthropocene and the illusion of separation. The Anthropocene frames the context in which human behavior has a huge negative impact on the planet. This is provoking, especially since the Great Acceleration, rapid and mostly negative geological, ecological, biological, and socio-economic changes in our system. And these changes translate into profound Earth-related transformations such as the climate emergency, the loss of biodiversity, the spread of zoonotic viruses, and the preoccupying rise of inequalities, among other global challenges. Our ancestors built, especially since the Industrial Revolution, a socio-economic system that was effective in shaping an idea of social progress and human prosperity based on unlimited techno-economic growth, and therefore the rise of civilization organized around the cycle of production and consumption. This era of economic development led to rapid increases in living standards, but it came with a huge price: the exponential deterioration of our natural ecological systems. Now, these negative externalities of a degenerative economic system that trades natural and human resources for profit is reaching a point of no return that threatens the entire sustainability of this socio-economic system we call capitalism. I'm not a politician, but our worldview dominated by the premise that economic growth leads to prosperity, even at the expense of the deterioration of our ecological system, caused a great illusion of separation between human and nature. Now, it is this idea that humans are detached from nature, in other words, that humans dominate nature, that is bringing our civilization to the edge of the precipice. Now, I am not here to preach doomsday, so this is just something to bring your thoughts, and I'll hand you back to Gary.
Um, Interesting points. I could recall many years ago when I sat on CONSOC IDB, we had an international representative that used the very same statement that economic growth leads to prosperity. And that's a blanket statement, but very often as you examine the blanket statement, it's not as blanketed as you wanted it to be, because that you can have economic growth, but then you have selective development that is taking place in the economy because there's not an equitable framework for equal access. But that's a topic for another conversation.
Exactly.
Now, going into today's conversation, today we're looking at leadership and processes and systems. And so far, you have an understanding of what is leadership. In the context of proactive leadership, we looked at processes. Now, the big question is now, what is systems? And what systems has to do with anything? Well, let me put it this way. The systems may be referred to as the best of both worlds. It is the best of both worlds because you need leadership and you need processes, And because of having the best practices of leadership and the best practice in process, you want to find a way to create a standard operating procedure. So what systemize your, yeah, they're the best of both worlds because they can be considered standard operating procedures. So what systemization does, it really helps you to zero in on the standard operating procedures. So now that you have standard operating procedures in leadership, you have standard operating procedures in your processes, how do you now systemize this? So making these standard operating procedures mean that several things are happening. A standard operating procedure has to be subjected to a number of targeted performance outcome. So one of the things that you're going to ask yourself is your standard operating procedure transparent enough? So let's take, for example, you have standard operating procedures for HR. Is it transparent? You have standard operating procedure public relation. Is it transparent? You have standard operating procedures for research. Is it transparent? Now, transparency is only the very first element that we look at. Why does it need to be transparent? Because the critical stakeholders need to understand what are these policies, because sometimes you set best practices, but then the best practices is not fully communicated throughout the organization. So you have A fighting with B and B fighting with C, because it is not a standard operating procedure may be there, but then there's no transparency. So what happens when you don't have transparency? You tend not to have accountability. You tend not to have consistency. You tend not to have traceability. You tend not to have scalability because you function in chaos. You tend not to have transferability. And you tend not to have a systems to optimize your processes, again, because you're functioning in chaos. So when system comes in, systems is coming to say to you, I've liked how you've built out your leadership strategies. I like how you've built out your HR policies, and I see these as best practices, and I'm seeing the positive impact it's having on the workforce. So systems say, let us create standard operating procedures. Those standard operating procedures must be transparent to the strategic, tactical, and operational team. We want consistency in how this is rolled out. I mean, just think about it in this way. You are manufacturing a product. Let's say it's a FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods. And let's say that product is chocolate. But you use the standard operating procedure today to produce chocolate, and you put a new team to work the night shift. And the night shift did not follow the standard operating procedure because you didn't establish a transparency. What happens there? You can hold them accountable. And what happens there? The end product, there's no consistency with the end product. And that can affect consumerism. It can affect how the ideal client relates to the brand. It can affect the business potential to grow and scale. So these are important concepts that you want to know as you build out your standard operating procedures for business. And again, as I said, very often when you see the clues to success, you run because you thought it was a simple pathway. But it turned out that the clue to success has a number of moving parts. And if you want to be successful, you need to understand it. All right. You need to deploy it. Or at least you need to ensure that you have a team of dynamic leaders next to you that understand these processes that can help you to deploy. Frank, just before you talk, come in. I find that whenever you put your hand to your face, it is canceling you out of the visibility of
Oh,
the program. I guess it has to do with the background and how it is set. So watch it for me. Yeah. So these are important concepts for you to learn. So far, I just want to walk you through some of what we have looked at so far. We have looked at the importance of leadership, or we have looked at leadership in the context of business and personal success. We have looked at processes in the context of business and personal success. And then we talk about the importance of taking the best of these two worlds and systemizing them. Systemization means that all the best practices, you're transparent about it, so you can hold all parties accountable. You can have consistency in how the task is executed. You can have traceability. If there's no traceability, guess what? You can't trace where things went wrong and you can't correct it. You want to ensure that you can have scalability. So all the best practices, you want to see if there are better ways of doing it. That's going to help you to optimize performance, optimize productivity, optimize profitability. This is why systemization is so important. Now that you have looked at all of this, you have transferability. Can this body of knowledge be transferred from organization to organization, to country? Yes, it can. And that's the importance of having systems. Success leave clues. And that's why you find many successful people in the world in business, they are able to start a new process, a new project, and in a short period of time, they're able to drive it to success because of leadership, because of processes, and because of systems. Master Frank, all to you, my friend. I'm not hearing you.
you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Okay. Um, let's look at the greater reconnection. It, as an economist, I've had a thoughtful analysis and reflection, and I'm concerned about the failure of my discipline and in the way of my own. You see, the economic axioms, theories, and practice that I studied in university, right in the 90s, have definitely worked for some, but have overwhelmingly failed in building a prosperous, and let's say, how to put this lightly? There's so many
I see
thoughts
where
going
you
through.
get it. No, I know
A
it, and
prosperous and
I
inclusive
get it.
society,
Yeah.
that thrives in a regenerative and healthy natural environment. Now,
Mm-hmm.
this notwithstanding, I later felt that there was something wrong with the premises and the mental models that underpins the dynamics of our socio-economic system. So we inquire about what should be the role of economics for the betterment of our societies and the regeneration of our nature. The main takeaway was that economics as a field in the domain of social sciences should be informed and should be guided and inspired by the universal, also called natural values, and the principles of oneness and interdependence between humans and nature. And this wisdom is found in most indigenous and perennial philosophies throughout the world. So I came to realize that the fundamental premise of any economist engaged in economic theory, policy, or business practice should be, if you see nature as if you're part of it, you are likely to treat it better. So the great reconnection, and we're still on the systems here. We're talking about the leadership system, but from an economic point of view. The great reconnection, the deep ecological awareness that humans are nature, and therefore part of it, translates into creation of what is called a Zen business model, a biomimetic methodology to guide the sustainable design and transformation of organizations and entrepreneurs, or the creation of the masters in sustainable business and innovation of a business school. I was missing a fundamental piece in the approach to understand and facilitate sustainable transformation in people and organizations. Your leadership was still very much focused on the self development of me, the individual, becoming a regenerative economist. My take an economist whose purpose is to utilize economics as a means to build a thriving society and a healthy planet. In my case, associated with a personal development process. And during this process, realize that and inquires and tries to change mental models and my behavior. And this is how I became aware that I was naturally a systems thinker. Systems thinking starts with the awareness that our thinking and way we see the world determine how we behave and how we act, which leads to the world we create for and around us. Gregory Bateson brilliantly said, we can't change a system without changing ourselves. Now, there's nothing wrong with an individualistic approach to leadership. On the contrary, conventional leadership approaches such as humble servant or transformational leadership are much needed in the transition to a regenerative economy. It is essential to question our own mental models so we can let ourselves the time and space needed for new mental models that lead to the great reconnection to emerge. But my point is that this process of self awareness is necessary but not sufficient for changing the system. The scope of the challenges we face is global, and its magnitude goes beyond individual agencies. These challenges, which are often wicked problems, require us to unleash, develop, and facilitate a process of collective intelligence in order to address it. So I believe that what is missing is a systems approach to leadership. This is an emerging leadership approach that works at the intersection between individual and collective agency to influence a regenerative and inclusive transformation of our socio-economic and ecological system. And such approach is emerging as a response to triggering collective action to address our anthropogenic challenges, which is a study led by the Harvard Kennedy School. And this defines systems leadership as a set of skills and capacities that any individual or organization can use to catalyze, to enable, and support the process of systems level change. Thank you.
Frank, you got me laughing because of what if you read it from the same books? Let me tell you why I laugh. Right?
I know.
Only last evening, I'm discussing with a team of colleagues, and we're asking what is the general impact on academic on society, because it is true the intellectual development of our people, it is a reflection also of the economic state and the economic future. But very often you see what is happening. We have a high failure rate, and this is not just local, this is a global reality. So I laugh when you talk about a systems approach, because what systems approach will do, it will force you to identify what is different with the 5% or the 10% who are excelling as against the 90% that are not. And what system approach will do is to help you to capture why the 5 or 10% are top achievers, to chronicle that and then try to figure out how to make it best practices. Now, I'm saying this because in the conversation, some of the things that we looked at is that when you start to capture what is happening with the 10% or the 5%, you get to recognize that the thesis is not the only predetermining factor of excellence. There are many other variables to optimize how the student population internalize information, relates to information, and apply information. There are many moving parts to that. So the system approach is what's going to enable these leaders at an economic level, at a sociological level, at a national level, to take a more inclusive thinking approach, thought leadership approach to optimize performance and productivity. So I do believe that as we talk about standards and the ISO standards being one of them, it's important to look at these issues. But Frank, I know that time is moving. So in conclusion, I want to say, well, not in coming to conclusion, there's a couple of things that I want to say. We have talked about leadership, we have talked about processes, and we have talked about systems. How do we deploy all of this in a practical case? So I want to give a practical case example. So you have standard operating procedure for brand optimization. So see yourself here as a consultant. You manage a branding and marketing consultancy firm, and the clients are coming to you for visibility, for reach, and all of these different things. Do you have a standard operating procedure? Now, if your leadership style, your processes are systemized, you don't have to worry about standard operating procedure. And one of the reasons that you're going to have standard operating procedures and systems is because team members can execute on these systems in your absence. So what does a standard operating procedures look like when it is properly systemized in the context of brand optimization? Step one, whoever is executing this process know that there's a standard operating procedure when it comes to the brand relatability. So that's one of the first things you want to look at, brand relatability. Second, you want to look at the brand visibility. Is there a game plan? What is the standard operating procedure for brand visibility? Because next you have brand reach. Visibility doesn't always equate to reach. So what are the standard operating procedure for visibility? And that has a lot to do with how you're going to be using the mass media, the social media, the metaverse, and independent communication channel. So there's a lot to get into here as we go into the example. We are given high-level overview. Frank, you're going to come to you shortly, Frank, to give your closing remarks. You also have the things like impact. Do you have a standard operating procedure to make impact? All right. Do you have a standard operating procedure for client conversion? So all of these things are things that you want to be clear on. You're going to struggle doing what you're doing because you're not clear about your processes. Your processes are not systemized, and because they're not systemized, you're not going to have consistent results in how you impact your clients and how you impact the business growth. So Frank, I'm going to allow you now to give your closing remarks, and then I'm going to come back to wrap up.
How can we bring systems leadership into action? I look at the 5 key steps and their core competences. To enable and facilitate system leadership in the organizations and communities. The first one is understanding the system. Then you have to envision and repurpose the system. Then you have to engage the system's participants. You have to co-create pathways of transformation. And then finally, monitoring and evaluating and learning for adaptation. When we look at understanding the system, we're seeing and sensing the system requires the ability to think systematically, Organizations need to build the capacity of the people on systems thinking and complexity awareness. And this is acknowledged by system scientists G. Midgley and C. Hobbs. The system thinker mindset focuses on identifying, analyzing, and synthesizing a system behavior. And it does so with an intentional focus to understanding the interdependence in the interdependent relationships between the elements of the system that explains its behavior and the different perspectives involved. And in doing so, the system thinker critically reviews boundaries that identify and constrain the scope and effects of the system dynamics and interventions. Then envision and purpose the system. Systems thinkers start exercising the leadership when they elaborate a compelling vision of how the system should work and why, so that the creative energy is unleashed and focus on what is being created instead of what is being solved. This helps release the tensions and frustration associated with working in the realm of wicked problems. And this work requires the courage to look in the future and deeply sensing what the system requires. During this exercise, we ask, what is our role and responsibility as part of the system in which we operate? The third one is engaging the system participants. The global challenge we aim to address involves a multiplicity of stakeholders. We so often pursue different interests in the system. For example, to end income equality, we need to persuade the rich elites to be taxed accordingly to their wealth, which may turn out to be against their individual interests. And citizens in so-called democracies may advocate and vote for tax reform, but political parties may develop arguments against as they don't want to challenge the elites as they financially support these political parties. So changing a system requires this kind of complex dynamics. For doing so, it requires involving and engaging the stakeholders that participate in the system. And once the purpose is clear for all actors involved, then you have the co-creating pathways of transformation. And having a high level of alignment and multiple diverse perspectives, engage in the journey of transformation channels, the flow of creative energy into a collective process of co-creation that focuses on prototyping the desired future. And in this process, the facilitation taps into the collective intelligence of the group by creating the conditions for creativity to engage. And among those conditions, it is critical to enable the right spatial environment and time and the psychological safety that allow the team to operate with high levels of freedom and trust. Now, these two latter factors are critical for honing a mindset that explore the future, which operates in the realm of possibility. And finally, when we're monitoring, evaluating, learning, production, and adaptation, one of the most recurrent pitfalls in the field of transformation is to avoid this step. Now, most often, initiatives end up right after the co-creation part. But it's paramount since the design phase, interventions of all sorts, including how the implementation of new solution, be it an activity, a program, a product, a service, or a policy, is going to be monitored and evaluated. Why do this? There are two main reasons for this. The first one is to learning how the newly created intervention is actually achieving its purpose, or in other words, how the intervention is actually changing the system as expected. And this is a learning that allows us to reflect upon what? Upon the system, and thereby take the corrective actions to serve its purpose and to adapt the intervention to an evolving context. Intervention often operate in highly complex systems, most often generate unintended consequences, or they shift the burden to other fields that were not taken into account. The second reason is for accountability. Working in the field of systems transformation requires acknowledging responsibilities and also being answerable for all decisions made and actions taken by the team. And this is something that is unfortunately neglected or avoided in most system level interventions that have strong repercussions in socioeconomic and ecological systems. Now, these 5 steps do not pretend to be a norm or an all inclusive thing to do in developing the capacities of systems leadership. They're rather a principles focused guide and approach to harness the power of individuals, to harness the power of teams, to harness the powers of organization and communities in order to enable and drive the creation of a more inclusive, just, and regenerative systems. Now, if you're interested in learning more of this, keep looking at our team, talk to us, and we're there to guide you through the process. Thank you, Gary.
All right, great share, Frank. However, I'm going to take the other side on one thing that you would have said. I'm a capitalist, right?
I
And
know.
I don't believe in taxing the wealthy based on the income. I believe in creating incentives for the wealthy and successful entrepreneurs to expand and grow so they can
Mhm.
create more employment and they can invest in innovation and be a part of the transformation process. So we can fight on the point, right?
A lot of fights can happen. But you see,
Uh,
Gary, because it's only because of the time. If that was a case where it's always innovation and creativity and building the standard of the ordinary individual, I don't have a problem with that.
mhm,
But what you find most times happening is that there's exploitation, and there is a resource curse phenomenon that
mhm.
these people who have all this tax this big money do. They just
I tell you, we can fight. I can tell you,
they
we
just
can fight.
exploit. They just exploit, and
I,
don't bury your
I
conscience in the
told
exploit.
you we can fight. No, no,
Don't
no, I
bury your
told you we can
conscience.
fight. Let me put this other thesis to you. What happened if the funds are remitted to the state, but then the state, as in most cases, doesn't function based on your expectations or doesn't function in collective interest? What do you say then? So we're going to fight on this issue. I do believe that once the private sector is fully empowered to get out and create jobs and all of these different kind of
Mhm.
stuff, and perhaps there should be state incentive that is going to encourage them to go along this path. We're going to have more of what you prefer to have because the incentives are there. There should not be silence incentive. There should be open incentive that if private sector go along this way, this is what's going to happen. We see it in a lot of developing economy, a lot of developed economy. We see what Canada did to transform aspect of their economy by
Mhm.
bringing, you know, academics, by bringing entrepreneurs and
Mhm.
government input to say this is where we
Mhm.
want to go. So we're
Mhm.
going to fight, my friend. But I see,
It's the same thing the United Arab Emirates has done. You see, because the
yeah.
thing about it is that we have to have a government system also that is willing to put the people for. And I understand where you're coming from, where states have failed badly. But
Yep.
that's where the politicians have a problem, and we have a problem with the politicians. I'm not saying that um you deliberately take all this creativity away from the private sector. But I'm
Mm.
saying, why not when you're doing this with private sector, how often do the big organizations really get involved in poverty
Alleviation.
alleviation? How often?
Yeah.
Right?
And you're right, Frank.
Look what's happening to our oil industry right now. When we look at the spendings of the CEOs that are not even put on the thing, they take the money away from what is supposed to come to the people.
Okay. Well,
That's my issue.
I'm gonna open up a conversation there when we have enough time to debate it.
Yeah,
But
it's all right.
A couple of points just quickly. History has shown that there's too much of bureaucracies in government, and perhaps there need to be that for the accountability factor. There's less bureaucracy within the private sector. So the private sector, they're able to move faster, they're able to execute. So I do believe that with the public-private partnership uh, is where we can definitely have an
Exactly.
accelerated,
Yes.
growth taking place. But Frank, you have skillfully navigated the conversation away from the topic into areas that you want to discuss. So let me, in conclusion, let me just try to bring it back to topic. I like the skill set, buddy. All right, quickly, I'm gonna just quickly say this, and then we're gonna wrap up. I want to hear a little bit more about the book, so I'm gonna be brief here. Now, we're talking now about standard operating procedure. Again, the question I want you to ask yourself: why leadership processes and systems are so important? It is important because it gives you clarity in terms of how to execute. So, see yourself again as a consultant, and someone is coming to you and they want to optimize their MVO. MVO meaning their minimum viable offer, their most viable offer. They want to enhance their MVO. Do you have a process to do this? And is that process systemized? In the first example that I give, there are 9 important steps that must be followed in this systemization process. 9. And it's important that you understand that. That's what process helps to do. In the second context, there are 7 processes that you need to understand. I'm just going to briefly go through this. Any attempt to optimize your MVO, your minimum or most viable offer, it begins with one, identifying the ideal client, because your products and services is not being made for you. It is being made for ideal client. So it begins with you identifying who is the ideal client, first of all, standard operating procedure. And as you identify the ideal client that you intend to serve, guess what? You're going to see multiple ways in serving the ideal client. Do you want to immediately go at providing multiple products and services? Perhaps not. So the step 2 is for you to identify the 1 in 10 factors of brand selection. And that's looking at one thing at the beginning. Why? Because to innovate products and services, sometimes there is a capital cost. In most cases, in all cases, there's a capital cost. You have to think about the human resource needs, the technical resource needs, and the capital resource needs to move a vision forward. Do you have these step-by-step approaches properly systemized? So these are processes that you need to understand. We also look at brand alignment. How do you know that the brand is aligned to the interests of the ideal client? We talk about stress testing. Have you stress test your value offer? What does stress test means? It means that you are relevant to the ideal client, whatever you're offering. It means that the market is viable. It means that the market is accessible. It means that you're reaching an urgent and immediate need. Have you stress test all of these moving parts? And do you have a established system by which you navigate this? Do you have clear processes that is properly systemized to ensure that you have consistency with the results, with your best practices? So again, today's a high level of we have given in terms of leadership, process, and systems, and what you should know about these issues. Frank, in closing, can you also give us a quick backdrop to the book,
Mhm.
and then we're going to
It,
wrap up?
it looks at the 21st century being a microwave era where everything moves at the speed of artificial intelligence. And there have been major shifts in the way modern business is conducted. Online shopping is the order of the day, and the speed at which cargo is delivered to homes and businesses is both overwhelming and exciting. So, to become successful, a leader must be steady, a leader must be disciplined. Therefore, an innovative and creative leader will be highly efficient and effective in their business operation. This is what the book speaks to. And so it's a book um, written for aspiring business owners, for business founders and CEOs, for families, for the head of the family, even for politics and church, because its purpose it's enlighten everyone in leadership position on the actions and attitudes that are required to obtain great success and to provide practical leadership advice through shared experiences.
All
No,
right, great share, Frank. And to the audience, I trust that you would have enjoyed today's conversation, leadership process and systems, what you should know. A lot of what we spoke about today was taken from a very unique thesis that we have developed, Pathway 5, and Pathway 5 really helps you to understand the pathway. It helps you to understand the science, theory, and practice of wealth creation. So whether you're going to create wealth through business or whether you're going to create wealth by, you know, investment portfolios, passive or active, Pathway 5 is a very unique platform to really help you to understand more about that. The good thing about this program is that the introductory program is going to be free. So very soon we're going to start to publicize content across social media to have the public to register for this program. And I want to assure you, you don't want to miss it. You just don't want to miss it. All the clues to success is what we're going to be looking at, the science, the theory, and the practice. Now, with that being said, I want to thank the audience from across the world who always tune into the program, who always look at the replay of the program. We are reaching over 50 countries today, and I want to thank those audience. Today we have had over 40 plus thousand subscribers over the last 4 months. So with that, I want to thank you. I also want to thank my colleague, Frank, for showing up here today and contributing to the conversation. And of course, Frank, he is an economist by profession. He is a practicing leader, and he has a new book that is soon to be released. Well, they say Toastmasters wear many hats, so I definitely wear many hats. I'm not going to go into all of it today, but we're going to have another 1 hour program. Frank, any last words before we wrap up, my friend? You're mute, you're mute.
just keep looking at us for advice on how to be the best leader, how to be the best business person. We're here to help you. Global Inc. You see our numbers there. Call us, talk to us. We're here to mentor,
Definitely.
train. Have a good day.
All right. All right, audience. Thank God it's Monday. I know some saying, man, we should have had a longer weekend because we got to get back on the work train now. Whatever you do, do have fun and believe in yourself, invest in yourself, and know that you have potential to achieve greatness. And you'll be the first person to say that to you. Have a great week ahead. Frank,
Good. You take care.
we'll talk soon, my brother.